Welcome to the Red, White, and You Show with Dean McMurray, the military medium.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another great episode of the Red, White, and You Show with yours truly, the military medium. Today, folks, I have a great guest for you, Nigel Allsopp. Nigel is the founder and president of the Australian War Animal Memorial. He's a 14-time author. He was also, actually, as of a year ago, was the serving senior constable with the Queensland Police Dog Squad. Now he still works in a civilian capacity, and he's also a veteran of the Australian Army. Nigel, welcome to the Red, White, and You Show, my friend.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You know, when we did an interview with Susan Bari, and one of the things, you know, we talked about the part of one of the big projects was the Australian War Animal Memorial that she did work on. And the more that I did a little bit of digging, it really touches my heart when anybody focuses on, because I didn't really realize it, was just the sheer number of animals that help our service men and women throughout history, right? And I saw one of the things that I believe it was on your bio, but you know, it's estimated that 9 million animals lost their lives in World War I alone. Tens of thousands of animals, mascots, gave comfort to our troops. And then, of course, you know, died in the line of duty and everything else. We're going to get more into that and why you're connected to animals and how that is. But Nigel, if you would, for the listeners and viewers, share a little bit who you are and kind of what you do.
Sure. I guess going backwards, like I said, I'm still with the Queensland Police as a civilian instructor now, training at the Police Academy. Prior to that, I spent many happy years as a police dog handler. I was actually a specialist dog handler, an explosive detection dog handler in what we call SRG, which Special Response Group, which I guess is equivalent to your SWAT team, and in the United States. Prior to that, and between the military, I had a bit of a go at, it's a bit of a go, 9 years as an elephant keeper, which I believe at various zoos, including A.W.A.M.O Zoo, San Diego Zoo, and Auckland Zoo in New Zealand. And during that time, I worked with many animals, including sea lions, and I worked for a little bit on attachment with SeaWorld here in Australia, and ended up training and rehabilitating a lot of animals that we re-released. So I learned a lot about exotic animals, and ended up writing a book, one of my first books, on behavioral enrichment, which is still used by the American Elephant Management Association, just on keeping animals occupied in captivity. And prior to that, of course, I basically worked with animals all my life, and prior to that, I was a military dog handler, including some operational tours of duties with alongside American troops in places like Mogadishu and Somalia. At the same time as that infamous sort of movie was made, or Black Hawk Down, and other tours of duty prior to that in various countries, and literally I joined when I was about 17, the military. So before that, my parents owned a small farm, and I was raised up on a sheep farm, actually. So I could ride a horse before I could probably walk, and whilst I was in the police, and all these connections will come about, where I met Susan Bahari again for about the fifth time. I was attached to the Californian Mounted Officers Association, where I did both basic and advanced mounted police courses in a place called Norco, which is wonderful little town. They call it the US capital of horsemanship. I think there's about 20,000 people in Norco and 45,000 horses, something like that. Everyone has a horse. Yeah, lovely place to go.
Yeah, I bet. So going back as far as you remember, you were really kind of raised up around animals, kind of always connected with them. Did you feel like a deeper sense of connection? Because, I mean, completely, you know, sometimes for some, and I don't want to put everybody in this box, if you will, but a lot of people kind of get in a niche, if you will, with certain animals, say maybe like you talked about dog handlers. So then they really have an affinity for dogs. Maybe some people, you talked about horses. Maybe somebody grew up on a ranch and then they really have an affinity all their lives just for horses. But for you, it's elephant handler, dealing with horses and everything else. Is there something deeper, a connection for you connecting and working with animals?
I think I'd still be sort of a canine person, a dog man. One of the first, experiences I ever had as a child, was having my own pet dog, Scamp, its name was. And as a policeman as well, I had three, over my career, I had three operational police dogs, but certainly one of them, my first dog, Baron, it's literally saved my life. I was, in a situation where I was dealing with an armed offender. Someone else came up behind me with a knife to stab me literally in the back, and my dog took him out. So you can't,
Wow.
I'm sure a human partner would have done the same, but as you know, dog handlers work on their own. They don't have a human partner, and so they become very much your partner, your soulmate at the time, and your comrade. And the reason I guess I have that affinity with dogs as well is because it leads on when the dogs are retired in many countries, and up until, and we can talk about this later, but
Right.
Including the US and my own country, they were treated as garbage almost. They've done their service. They don't get paid a pension. They don't get paid. Their veterinary
Right.
bills don't get paid. Even military dogs. Fortunately, in America, you guys have got a bill. It's still pending, but at least it's in writing, that stopped dogs being euthanized when they retired. You can now adopt them. But you can adopt a military working dog, but we don't give you any money to look after it, to feed it, and if it needs, medical attention, you don't get that from your own government either, which is
Right.
a bit of a shame. And there's some fantastic work by Ron Ronaldo and from the US War Dog Association, and John Burnham, who made a wonderful memorial for dogs in America. It's a beautiful thing in Washington. And that too, huge personalities that are doing great work for American war dogs.
Well, I was going to also say a previous guest as well is James Mellick, who is another sculptor, but he primarily works in wood, and talking about primarily dogs and, service dogs. Just talking about, I remember him talking about Vietnam, right? And just the sheer number of dogs that the Americans, and I'm sure maybe there was other countries, but actually had to euthanize. And it was just appalling. Just they treat them like equipment, right? We're done using
that's
it.
the problem. They still are classified as equipment in both our countries. And incidentally, we had 11 dogs in Vietnam, and we left our 11 dogs in situ in Vietnam to an unknown fate. I mean, they tried to get them homes as best they could with local dignitaries, but eventually everyone was thrown out of Vietnam. So we don't know what happened to our dogs either. I think while they don't change a military working dog status to something like canine service animal, or something similar, or canine member perhaps, until they change that status from equipment to a member, they'll still be treated as a piece of equipment and disposed of.
Right. Well, I know the joke always was, because we could look it up on computers, I still remember this, was was looking up a dog and the national stock number that every piece of American equipment has in the military, system has that national stock number. And there was one for a dog. And we found it so odd because I never worked with dogs. I knew, would see working dogs around, but I was just regular light infantry, right? So I wasn't the dog guy or the people with the dogs, but I always joked and saying, well, I guess they need to issue me a dog because there's a stock number for it. And I found it so interesting, but now, on the backside of it, I look at it and I'm like, that's kind of sad because equipment, I don't have a stock number, a national stock number. I'm not a piece of equipment. I'm obviously probably an asset as way as maybe generals look at it, but, they just looked at an animal as a piece of equipment. The same, I'm sure, with horses during World War I, right? And another one that's Nigel, that you're very prolific about is pigeons, right? A lot of people don't think about those.
Yeah. Look, it started off almost as a bit of a joke. I mean, pigeons are something that poop on you as you walk under a tree,
Right.
And I got to look at them, and America was a huge user of pigeons in World War I and World War II. We're talking several 100,000 animals. In Australia, even in World War II, we used 25,000 pigeons fighting alongside American forces, in the Southwest Pacific. And the reason for that is, we look at our modern technology, and we even had obviously technology in World War I that could transmit a radio. But a lot of the shells in World War I particularly broke the wires, so they had human runners. One of the most famous, human runners was in the German army, of course, was Adolf Hitler, wasn't it? But we used to use a lot of dogs, and both countries, and all countries, I should say, in that time, and they were very reliable, but in the same token, they could carry a picture of a map. We look at our mobile phones today and we can Google this, that, and the other and get the message across. But in those days, the only way a commander could appreciate the lay of the land by map was to actually draw it still and stick it in a tube and stick it on a pigeon or a dog. And pigeons were slightly more reliable than dogs. Dogs had there's a famous Australian dog that we have stuffed, taxidermy, in the Australian War Museum, which was actually a World War I German dog. But the saying goes, he was opposite the Australian forces, but he obviously got sick of German sausages and decided to be an Australian tucker and defected for the last 3 years of the war to Australia. And we used him as a messenger dog ourselves. So there you go.
I was going to say, did they entice him with some Vegemite or some biscuits?
But in World War II, of course, the Americans were using pigeons because the Japanese at one stage, we believe, may have broke our code. So the best way of getting a message across was via a pigeon.
Right. Well, and it's well known too, right? Using pigeons for detecting gas and other things, in certain areas as well, right? Having caged animals, unfortunately, in with the troops. And take us a little bit. Obviously, we've already been talking about some of the species of animals that are honored at the Australian War Animal Memorial. But take us a little bit into that, Nigel, and kind of run us through that.
Sure. I would be remiss, and someone might point it out. I better just point out, if I could, before I do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your own Smithsonian Institute, you have a taxidermied pigeon, probably the most famous messenger pigeon in the world. He was awarded the Fleur de Lis, the French Medal for Gallantry. And this sounds very anthropomorphic, I guess, when you tell the story, but allegedly it's an absolute true story. He's a very highly awarded American pigeon from World War I. He was let loose in the trenches to give a message back to headquarters that the American troops needed more equipment and ammunition. He got shot as he flew up in the air. His wing was severed. and he spiraled down to the ground. He then a short time after, got gassed by chemicals by the Germans, was blinded in one eye. He then received a short time after a piece of shrapnel in his chest. But that pigeon, remember their modus operandi, but the pigeon walked a kilometre back to the headquarters, delivered his message, and died in the hands of the American commander. So that's one of your most famous, perhaps, pigeons.
Wow.
So I'll get on to your, I just wanted to point that out.
No, that's...
America probably has the most famous pigeon in the world, in fact. And and I know Susan, by the way, is looking at some stage of perhaps making some form of bronze pigeon monument, which would be great.
Sure.
Yeah. But to answer your question, in our sort of museum, and the United States World War II Museum is very, very similar setup. They have, in Australia, we have a famous horse. You mentioned horses before. About 140,000 Australian horses went to World War I. Only one ever returned. And part of that, or the head side of it, is in the Australian War Museum. It represents all the animals, all the horses that went. We have a dog also from the Afghanistan War, very similar, Special Forces dog, very similar to some of the stories that you have with SEAL Team 6, for example. And we have our own sort of pigeon. But a lot of animals are only represented there, thankfully, by a gentleman called Dr. Nelson, and myself got together. He was the director. He's now left. And we've helped establish an official war animal memorial there, a grave of remembrance. The unknown, you'll be familiar with the unknown soldier's tomb, the Eternal Flame. Yeah. Well, we have one for war animals there as well. That's, and it's a big circle with dogs' footprints, circling inwards towards the flame. And that's like an eternal, and there's the ashes of one of our famous war dogs underneath that, an unknown war dog, so to speak. And so, yeah, they've done some pretty great work to recognise them, but that's only come in very, very recent years. If you asked anyone in Australia, a lot of countries, perhaps 10 years ago, they wouldn't have had a clue about war animals.
Oh, wow. Well, and I was going to say, Nigel, how do you even get involved in, becoming the founder and the president of, this war animal memorial for your entire country? Like, were you, how did you kind of get involved in that project to begin with?
Yeah, well, as I said before, having been, a military dog handler, and I had several dogs, and again, in those days, like Vietnam, it wasn't until 1993 that the first dogs in my country were ever allowed to come home. So we would go on operations in places like Kosovo or the First Gulf War, and we'd have to leave our dogs behind. Fortunately, in modern times, we're able to give them to the American forces, or I know we gave one dog to the French, for example, that didn't have any quarantine requirements. We were fortunate those dogs got home, but there was a law banning them. So I sort of said, this is rubbish, and I've got the law changed that the dogs then started to be able to come home. And because of that, they built a veterinary facility. It used to take something like 6 months to get a dog home. And the governments can fluff around in both countries and come up reasons why they don't bring them home. But the bottom line is money. It just costs a lot of money and the other realistic thing is, by the time the dog's been in quarantine for 6 months, in the old days, they only have to be in for about 3 weeks now. But in the old days, when it was about 3 months, of course, they're not a piece of machine you can plug a battery into. Half of them had forgotten half of their training over a 6 month period. Sure. So they're not even perhaps viable, and they're 6 months older because they have a shelf life, because they only were operational for about 8 to 10 years maximum. So, unfortunately, there's a lot of commanders out there, high up people that think because they are a piece of equipment again, if you keep one on the shelf, when you need it, you pull it down, stick a battery in it, and away you go. Any dog handler tells you it takes years and years. And unfortunately, all our countries, America was the same prior to World War One, then prior to World War Two. Once the war's over, they tend to lower the numbers and disband their animals.
Right.
And then they wonder why it takes 10 years when there's a war and they need them to bring them back again.
Wow. So, kind of serendipitous that we're coming up, we're doing, today is what, the 19th of February?
Yeah, and the
24th.
Yeah, it's War Animal Day. I guess to answer a bit of your question, and as a prompt, thank you. I decided they needed their own day to be recognised, so I went around various politicians in the country. I got a magic letter which really opened some doors from me. I thought, well, why not be a bit cheeky? So I wrote to Her Majesty the Queen of England, and I got a lovely letter back. I'll actually send it to you on email later on, and supporting the idea of War Animal a day and thank me for my work. So I was literally, I was a name dropper. I literally walked into buildings holding this lovely letter with the Queen's signature and crown on. And that opened a few doors, and politicians jumped on the bandwagon. My local politician, Scott Burkholdt, was marvelous. He would be the equivalent to a governor in America. He's our state sort of a federal member. And he got behind the project and stood up in Parliament. And so a small little, it's like a rolling stone down a hill. And so it gathered. I then went across to open up a New Zealand war animal memorial. So New Zealand to Australia is very much like Canada is to America. Some people get them confused, but don't you dare sort of mention it. And so I went over there because part of Australia, because we and New Zealand are fairly small countries, we fight as a combined unit, usually called the Anzacs, Australia and New Zealand Corps, which incidentally to your listeners, I know, given your background, I can't recall just off the top of my head of a war, with perhaps the exception of Grenada, that America since the World War One has been in without having Australian troops next to you,
right?
And Kiwis as well. I think apart from that, we've been in every war with you, alongside you. Now, just so I opened up a memorial there, and their Prime Minister was there, and she said, "What can we do?" And I just casually mentioned the 24th, and being the Prime Minister, I guess she did it immediately. So that afternoon, New Zealand had a War Animal Day, which actually beat the Australian one, even though I'd applied 6 months before, by about a week. So actually, New Zealand can claim to be the first country in the world to ever have a War Animal Day, but it was via an Australian, so we still claim it. Yeah.
Well, and to go along with that as well as the purple poppy, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and this is where Susan Bahari has been great in the United States, pushing it. In the United Kingdom and a lot of Commonwealth countries, Canada, your nearest neighbour, also recognises a red poppy for the deeds and sacrifices of soldiers. And so we've come up with a purple poppy to recognise the deeds and sacrifices of what we call four-legged diggers, or four-legged soldiers, or winged soldiers, as the pigeons may be referred to. But so that was again, it sounds easy. It's taken me about 12 years to get that finally recognised, and it's still a work in progress, such as in the United States. And this is how we raise our funds, and this is where Susan needs a lot of assistance. And it doesn't sound much, $1, but you can buy, or $2, but you can buy anything from a crocheted sort of purple poppy for $1 from the scout group or a school, to a beautiful $25 one, which Susan has. And every cent of that goes in to build the United States War Animal Memorial, which she's designing. So we're using the poppy to, one, identify war animals, and we ask people to wear a purple poppy on the 24th of February or even Remembrance Day, any day, to remember that animals fought side by side. In fact, it's just a scientific fact that both our countries could not have fought World War I and World War II without animals. It's as simple as that. Then after that, in Korea, you guys and we had small amounts of military working dogs. You had a famous horse called Sergeant Reckless, which was a famous Marine Corps horse, which you have a statue of in Pemberton, I think it is. And then you also, obviously today, no decent military in the United States and Special Forces unit would go to war without a military working dog. They're that valuable. Yeah. So it does that, and also helps raise funds for what we need to do, make these memorials to make people aware. The biggest memorial that Susan has helped us with, we call it the Australian World War I War Animal Memorial. It's in a beautiful town called Pozières in France, and what a wonderful. May I just have a shameless plug for them?
Absolutely.
They're a village that really does servicemen right. There's probably only 100 people in this village, 18 houses. They got flattened in World War I. Literally, they built every building there is built by the same bricks that still got bullet holes in them. In World War II, the Germans flattened them again. They built their houses again, the same 18 or 20 houses. And a lot of the monuments are all around this village for humans and now an animal one. And these guys go out for free and maintain the gardens and polish them. And the only way the village, it's way up in the northern France, and the only way the village earns their money, they like literally are still peasant farmers, is people coming to the village and paying their respects and buying a cup of coffee at the local cafe. And so I encourage every American and Australian to visit Pozières and see the War Animal Memorial, because it's not just for Australia. While Susan made our beautiful Australian memorial, I again raised enough funds for respect for Susan to build another one by the side of it for all other animals, including the United States. So the United States have a War Animal Memorial now in Pozières, and I'm a little remiss. I will send you an email of a flight. In fact, you can Google it. People can, if they Google Pozières War Animal Memorial on YouTube, they'll get a beautiful 5-minute sort of flyover by a UAV of the memorial site.
Oh, beautiful.
And,
okay.
You'll see 6,000 white crosses surrounding the War Animal Memorial. One of those is for every the 5,900 Australian soldiers that died in 90 minutes defending that one hill. And the reason I put there, I heard your show. Obviously, I watched Susan's talk with you, and the reason I put it there is because of one of my relations was a muleteer, a mule handler on that very site. Yeah.
Oh wow. Wow.
So,
yeah. Beautiful. That's the touching tribute to, those animals that ended up paying the ultimate sacrifice for that during that battle. So the Australian War Memorial Organization, they do quite a bit with PTSD, don't they?
Yes, we do, and thank you for mentioning it. Like we obviously it's quite common now that it's proven that dogs are great for PTSD, and we purchase, for want of a better word, and pay for the training of dogs for veterans with PTSD. What the other thing that we're doing, I literally just dropped off a check last week for the equine PTSD program. We work with a returned serviceman, which is a government-based company called Mates for Mates, and they have several horses, 20 or so horses, which we help fund. Other people help fund them too, but we help fund them. And these horses can either be ridden by veterans in a sort of a horse trek, and they go camping, and obviously there's a psychologist amongst them, and they get to do their feelings. Otherwise, if they don't ride, they have sort of, I guess it sounds rather warm and fluffy, but they have like 4 horses that just hang around with you in the paddock. And these horses, they're an amazing animal. If the horse won't do anything unless you talk to it. And for men that are suffering, and women suffering from lack of communication, a horse will actually come up and nudge you till you start touching it or talk to it. And it forces these poor people to actually communicate. And that's when a doctor comes in, once they start talking to the horse. I've never seen one of these sessions yet with some tough men, ranging commandos and whatever, equally of any SEAL, US SEAL. Haven't seen one of them without people's tears crying, them crying. Once the horses start to interact, it's a great thing to see.
Equine training or therapy is I know it's catching a movement here, at least it is here in the United States. And I know that not only is it big for soldiers dealing with PTSD and other traumas, but also troubled youth and other folks, just the civilian populace, right? Even the police, fire, paramedics, nurses, doctors, anybody dealing with any traumatic. It is a powerful program. And horses are cool because they have their own personality. Like you said, and look, come up like, again, hey, get out of here. They'll reflect.
And again, I mentioned previously that wonderful town in California, Norco. When I went there on my police ride, I noticed there's about 10 different organizations in that town alone that do equine therapy, and one that does PTSD with dogs. And so they're on. In fact, the other thing, which is equine connected and connected to that village, I purchased from there. There's a wonderful saddle maker there, and we purchased what I would call an amputee saddle. It's from a World War I Australian design of a saddle. It's an Australian design, and what it does is for veteran soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq, etc., that have lost one limb or both limbs. It's a sort of a special saddle that, again, I'll send you a picture of it, which enables the rider to be strapped in either with one leg or both legs missing, and enables you to ride a horse. Now, people might initially say, well, that's good, but it's like the saying, I can't play a piano anymore, but it doesn't matter because I never played it in the first place.
My dad used to say that all the time.
What do you need to ride a horse for? Well, it's got nothing to do with riding a horse. It's the actual movement of the hips. And as you ride a horse, particularly in the walk position, your brain is sort of working overtime, and the hips are moving. And when you put a couple of prosthetic legs on, the same hip movement of the horse is the same as you require to walk with artificial limbs. And the horse riding is training you up, or your brain, to be able to walk properly. So it's quite clever. Yeah.
Interesting. So Nigel, where can folks go to check out more about the memorial? If they're sitting there and saying, this sounds really cool, I would like to check more about it, maybe make a donation, or maybe just go visit. Maybe they're going to go on holiday. I know COVID is throwing a wrench in everything, but where can they go?
Yeah, well, just internally, I would plead everyone to support Susan Bahari in the United States. It's your own war memorial, and and two things. One, she's doing not only going to be doing a great job, she's also got several memorials already. I mentioned the one already in Guam. She has one of a little dog in France called Sergeant Stubby. She's also got, if you go onto Susan Bahari's website, which I know she gave you listeners the last time, she's got several little memorials for not only honouring police dogs, service animals, but also dogs, the SEAL Team 6 dog, for example, and the dog handler that sadly passed away a short time after that raid. She's got I think it may be in Arizona, don't quote me, but Susan website has it all there. So while COVID is restricting perhaps international travel, Susan's done several. She's got in Ohio, there is a wonderful little statue of Smokey the war dog. We talked about, and this is one of the coincidences we're talking about before the show. Smokey is an American dog, but born in Queensland, my hometown. In World War II, a young air corporal called Bill Wynn was under General McCarthy's sort of tutelage, or one of his Air Force mechanics, and who was stationed in Brisbane, again, McCarthy. And this dog this is a simple version, this dog used to run up and down the hospital, the Brisbane hospital, which was then called the US Naval and Marine Corps Hospital. And one of the doctors had a look at this. Remember, PTSD and shell shock before World War II was wrongly diagnosed. In fact, in World War I, people were shot and called cowards for having PTSD with shell shock. They didn't understand what it was. And so it was, even in World War II, it was its infancy. But this dog was playing with people. It was a little 4-pound Yorkshire Terrier, by the way, not a big military dog. And it was students, or I beg your pardon, patients were seen to improve mentally when this dog. So this sort of doctor decided to experiment, and Smokey therefore became the world's first canine PTSD dog. We talk about them being a relatively new invention. Well, Bill Wynn, and an American, 80 odd years ago, in about 1943, had the world's first post-traumatic dog for the American Armed Forces, which happened to have been born in Australia. So there's a beautiful statue, a duplicate statue that Susan has done. She has Smokey in Bill Wynn's hometown. And by the way, just a big hello to Bill. He's still alive. He's nearly 100 years of age.
Oh, wow.
So if ever he's listening to this, he's very coherent. He'd be great on your show, in fact. And
we'd love to have him.
He lives in a place called Mansfield in Ohio. And he's still around, and he's a wonderful man. There's a beautiful statue of his World War II dog, and we have a duplicate of it on the very grounds of the US Marine and Naval Hospital, which is now being demolished. It's sitting in the park. It's now surrounded by a modern hospital where a children's hospital, and the kids go down and put purple poppies around the statue as we speak. I made one of the books you talked about. I made a children's book on it called Smokey the War Dog, and 100% of that, the sales or the charity, go to the children's hospital, and the children have it's called the Starlight Foundation as well, and the children, and I've given about 100 books or so to the should last them a while, to the hospital for the kids to read. So this World War II dog, not only is that, is still American dog, is still very, very much alive in Australia.
Wow. That's a beautiful, beautiful story. And, powerful reminder that animals are just tremendous healers, right? And they've been used, people have been connecting with animals for millennia, and, just very powerful. Well,
I
my
believe
friend,
there are
go ahead.
statistics out there that believe if you're over 80 and want to live to 90, get yourself a pet, either a cat or a dog. They believe a heartbeat next to a heartbeat gives you about 10 years of longevity extra. Yeah.
Interesting.
So
I saw your canine partner in the background that was kind of like, ooh, dad's on Zoom. And then he went in the other room.
Yeah.
He kind of peeked in and was like, whoops.
She's 16. She's an explosive detection dog, or was. She retired after the G20 summit. She searched Obama's car and hotel room, and so there's an American connection even with the dog behind me. And so when he was over here at the G20 summit, she retired shortly after that. She's 16. Every day that I have is a blessing, but I'll certainly miss her when she's gone. Yeah.
Right.
She, by the way, holds a Dickens certificate, commendation for finding the most amount of explosives and firearms in Australia. And she, so, and the Dickens medal is like the Victoria Cross, for canines, for animals. If you have a look at it, there's a couple of American dogs recently that have received the Dickens medal. Those handlers, I'm sure, would be eager to talk about that. I can send you their names.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very prestigious and always fun to connect and learn more about their canine partners and kind of what they're doing. My friend Nigel Allsopp. Nigel, thank you so much. I know it's early morning there where you are, but thank you for taking time this morning and connecting, and thanks for sharing your story. And more importantly, thank you, and thank you to your four-legged friends for what you have done and what you continue to do, not only for your country but ours and everybody else, keeping us safe. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.